our experts and topics that Purdue Extension can provide. Um, we've been working on these for quite a bit now, and if you guys miss any, just feel free to go to our YouTube page where we have those recorded. This will count for an hour of education if you are a master gardener, so please make sure to put that on your records. And right now, we're going to just turn over to John Woodmansee. The floor is yours. We do ask that everyone please remain muted. We do have a good crowd today. If you do have questions, please throw them in the chat and we will get those addressed. So, John, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Jeff, and also your cohorts there in Area 8. I appreciate it. We're going to talk about conifer identification today. This title, "Which Pine is Mine," is kind of a joke, joke of a title, or maybe a play on words or a feeble attempt at poetry. I'm not sure which, but the idea here is that everybody looks at an evergreen and they say they're all pine trees, right? And of course, we know that that's not true. So we've got pine trees, we've got spruce trees, we have fir trees, and several others. So we're going to try to sort all of that out today. And so let's start. They're not all pines. However, if you look at the scientific taxonomy or classification of plants, the level just above genus, and normally when we're talking about plants, whether it's garden plants, flowers, etc., we talk about the genus and then the species. Well, the level just above that is the family. And so, believe it or not, you're not too far off if you say they're all pines, because in the pine family, we have pines, we have spruces, we have firs, we have hemlocks, Douglas fir, and also larch. So that's a pretty big list. If we go over to the other one, the yew family, however, just has our yews in it. Common example there would be the Japanese yew that is used in a lot of home landscapes. And then over on the right there, the cypress family, bald cypress, arborvitae, junipers, many of those, and dawn redwood. In Indiana, there are no true cypress or cedars. Most of those are a kind of a subclass of that or whatever. So the bald cypress, I would have to check on that. Maybe that is a true cypress, but we don't have any true cedars in Indiana. We've got some trees that have cedar in their name, but we'll show why that's not a true cedar in just a little bit. So before we get started, I thought I would just cover why do we want to learn about this stuff? And you may have your own reason for joining us today, but curiosity is always a good motivator. We want to know the differences between these species. And also, we won't cover it today, but if you're, if you have Christmas trees or some other holiday tree, you might have to know if it's going to hold needles and ornaments well as you celebrate your particular holiday. And also growth habit knowledge. It's good to know what is normal for a tree or what is abnormal. So conifers, if you don't know this, they lose their oldest inner needles every single year, and that is normal growth. This becomes very pronounced on white pine. If you have white pine in your landscape, every fall of the year, there's a pronounced yellowing of those oldest inner needles. And that is a natural function of the tree. I get a few calls every year, it seems like. I think my white pines are dying. And if you're a master gardener and get the same question, you can just calm them down. And if that yellowing is confined to the inner part of the tree, not the needle tips, that is a natural function of the tree. So if you have white pines and that alarms you, you can be assured that that's a normal thing. The other thing we sometimes have in our home landscapes is that conifers that get too shaded on one side begin to look kind of barren on that side. And that's just an environmental problem. They're not getting enough light to support those needles and branches. And so they start thinning out on that side. Sometimes in forests, what we'll do is plant a row of conifers and a row of deciduous trees kind of in lines to the conifers kind of protect somewhat the deciduous trees until they get a good start. And then when the deciduous trees take off, they will shade that those conifers. And normally in a forest situation, we're more interested in the deciduous trees, oaks and maples and so forth. So it's kind of a nurse crop almost in a forest. But in our landscapes, if you've got a conifer that is not looking so hot, look to see if it's getting a lot of shade. And if it is, it's just never going to thrive in that spot. Some more reasons why to learn. If you know the plant, you can more easily identify pests. So we have some insects and diseases that attack certain pines or spruces. And by having a shorter list, we don't have every single pest or disease out there that we have to think about. So here's kind of a condensed list of some of these. Pine needle scale, typically that will be on several of them though, pines, firs, and spruces. I will say if you've got a Colorado blue spruce in your yard, and it starts to looking kind of thin and you got some purple needles on it, it's a good chance you may have this next disease, Rhizosphaera needle cast. That's common on spruces, but also Canaan and Fraser firs. But that's one. Of course, Colorado blue spruce is not a native spruce to Indiana. So if you can get 40 or 50 years out of a Colorado blue spruce, you're doing pretty good. And after that time, my experience is it's pretty much done. Diplodius Phaeropsis tip blight. During my career, that disease has been called either Diplodia or Sphaeropsis. It's actually, I think, going back and forth a couple times. But on the two needle pines, Scotch, red, Austrian, and Mugo pines, that's pretty consistent. Cytospora canker, one that's on blue spruce, but I don't see that a lot. Zimmerman pine moth is one that will attack Scotch and Austrian pines. And what we see with that pest is right where a branch comes into the main trunk, that union there, there'll be an overwhelming amount of oozing of the resin and sap, and the little larvae kind of tunnel around in there and eventually kill the branch. I've seen Zimmerman pine moth infestation so bad that the top of the tree literally just falls over. Bagworm, another common pest in arborvitae, juniper, and several others. This looks like a little Christmas ornament dangling from a branch, but there's actually a little caterpillar inside a bag, but it's camouflaged with the foliage of that particular plant. And so it kind of looks like something that belongs on the plant, but it's got a little worm inside. So they can kill the plant if they're too numerous. Spruce spider mite. If you have any experience with two-spotted spider mite or have heard of spider mites, spruce spider mite is a cool season mite in that it will be active in the cool season, spring and fall, whereas our two-spotted spider mite is a pest of crops sometimes, and it is more active in the very hot part of the year, so the summer. So spruce spider mite, if you got a pine or a spruce that's kind of got a bronze cast to it, take a piece of paper out there and shake the branch over a piece of paper, and if little dots fall off of the the branch and they move, you've got spider mites. European pine shoot borer. This is another caterpillar that will attack several different pines. White pine weevil, again, pines and spruces. So this is, we've taken a little bit of time to go through this, but these are some of the more common pests of conifers. There are also some misunderstandings that probably deserve a little explaining. We had this at the outset, all evergreens are pine trees, and we know that some are spruces and firs and other plants. Second misunderstanding, all evergreens are trees, and that is not the case either. Some are shrubs, Mugo pine, yew and junipers, etc. Number 3 there, all conifers are evergreens. No, some are deciduous. And when we're talking about conifers, we're talking about a plant that produces a cone. Conifer is a cone-bearing plant. So some of these are deciduous in that they will lose their needles every single year. So they are a deciduous conifer. And we've got a pretty short list here. Larch and tamarack, that's the same tree. Bald cypress, and dawn redwood, which is very, very close in appearance to the bald cypress. Number 4, evergreens are evergreen. You might think that, and visually on the outside, yes, they are, but we talked about white pine losing its oldest needles every year, and that's true for most of our evergreens. Evergreens are conifers. Number 5. No, some evergreen shrubs do lack cones. Now, these are rare. Tamarisk, heather, mountain heath. I don't know that I've actually run across those, but I know they exist. And the final one, all evergreens have needles. And if you have several different types of landscape plants, you know that we've got some broad-leaved evergreens like rhododendron and boxwood and holly and so forth. Now there's a handout that you'll probably get as an attachment as a follow-up to this that will kind of go along with the presentation. So if you want to revisit this material in the recording, you can kind of follow along with the handout, but you don't need it to go through our presentation today. We talked to here's some terms here we need to cover before we get into the meat of the program here. Conifer, we talked about it. It's a cone-bearing plant. The important thing to keep in mind here is that all cones don't look like a pine cone. So we've got some cones that I'll point out that are certainly not like a typical pine cone. Evergreen, you know, we got foliage, green foliage through the winter, and deciduous, they lose their foliage in the winter. So a slide on general characteristics. Tamarack or larch, we've got pine-like needles in clusters of many. So if you look at this line drawing here, this is a typical picture of a tamarack or larch. And they've got needles in a cluster of many in a cluster. However, what's unique is on the brand new growth, we'll have singly borne needles. So it's got both actually. Pines, with pines, we have a structure like this. When we pick one of these off of here, they'll come off in a bundle. And they are wrapped at the base with this papery sheath called a fascicle. And it puts them in bundles, typically of 2 to 5. We do have some 3-needled pines. But that's a pine tree. Spruces, we've got a single square needle. And the tips are sharp to the touch, so sharp that I guess it's possible you could even draw blood if you mishandle or quickly grab a branch or something like that. But over here, here's this little woody pegs that these needles are borne on. And if you want to impress your friends with a new word, they're called sterigmata or pulvini. So there you go. Firs, hemlocks, bald cypress, and yews have single flat needles of varying looks to them. And then cedars, juniper, arborvitae, we have what are called scale-like. And if you think of a fish scale, That's kind of like what we're talking about here, or awl-like needles. And if you don't know what an awl is, it is a leather working tool that just simply punches a hole in leather. So it's just a little spike. And so that's why we call this awl-like needles. So we're going to talk about different groups of conifers, and this is not, when I have examples here, this may not be an all-inclusive list, but those that have needles include pine, spruce, hemlock, and fir. So we have the typical needle-like looking structure. Scales, as we see here, red cedar and white cedar would be typical of that. Also, when we talk about needles, we can look at the number of needles, and that'll give us a clue as to what conifer we're looking at. If we have one, just a singly borne needle, we're talking about spruce trees or fir trees, hemlock, and then bald cypress is also in that category. If we have needles in bundles of two, those are pine trees. Either Jack, Red, Virginia, or Scotch are examples there. And needles in bundles of five, we've got one native example of that, and that's the white pine. There are a couple of oddballs out there, but generally when you see a 5-needle pine, that's a white pine. Another thing that can give us some clue as to what tree that we're looking at are the cones, both the shape of the cone and the structures on the cone and just what they look like. So over on the left here, we start out with Scotch pine, fairly small cone, Virginia pine. Virginia pine will have little spines on the end of these cone scales. Red pine, spruce, and you see white pine has a fairly large cone. Hemlock is a very small cone, and there are other examples. So looking at not only the number of needles, but also the typical cone that they make gives us a big clue as to what tree we are looking at. And if you've never considered this, the branching pattern also helps us a little bit. Alternate branching is most of the trees, but when we look at opposite or world, world would probably be the correct term in this case. White pine and red pine, you see, are at each node we've got several branches coming out. Okay, this is a slide that I think if you kind of grasp this will get you started on conifer identification. So let's start all the way over to the left. We've mentioned this before, but a pine tree has needles in a bundle, and these are in bundles of 2, 3, or 5. And also we note that the cones hang down. All the cones hang down. Now the next one is spruce. Now if you look at this structure here, here is a needle that is snapped in half. And if you look at this cross section of the needle, it looks like a box. So if you snap a needle off of a spruce tree and you roll it between your fingers, you'll feel those edges. You'll feel it feel like a box between your fingers. So if you got that, you've got a spruce tree. So these are the single square stiff needles on woody pegs or stalks, and also the cones hang down. Going over to fir, and other trees have flat needles, but the fir tree has cones that stand up. So a true fir will always have the cones standing up from the base there. If you look at the cross section of a fir tree, and by the way, on the needles, you'll also see that a lot of them, not all of them, but especially with white fir or concolor fir, those needles will kind of angle up kind of like they're reaching for the sun or something. But the cross section of a fir tree it's a flexible needle, and it's a kind of a flattened oval here. And so pine, needles in a bundle; spruce, square needles, singly borne; fir tree, single needles again, but they're a flattened oval and they're pretty flexible. This other distinction of the cones being upright on fir where they hang down on pine and spruce is another important distinction. So let's go through a few trees. We'll start out with tamarack, which we've talked about. Here is a picture of those many needles in a bundle. Kind of look like they're in a, I don't know what you would compare that to, maybe a 4th of July starburst or a firework going off, I don't know. But several needles in a bundle there. So needles in clusters of many, but on the new growth, just one. So with each of these slides, I'll have a little quick ID thing here that we'll review. So that's tamarack, also known as American larch. By the way, again, this is one of our deciduous conifers, so this loses its needles every single year. The next one is eastern white pine. And then you'll notice in our quick ID, the only thing I really need to mention here is that if you pull off a needle cluster, there'll be 5 needles there. And that's very unique. We don't have any other native pines that are that way. Again, a few little oddballs out there, but for the most part, eastern white pine will have these 5 needles in a cluster. And it's got a pretty long cone there that will hang down. Next is red pine, and both white pine and red pine, if you have a tree line to protect, a rural property from winter winds and snow, red pine and white pine are a couple of the plants that are typically chosen just because they've got a pretty dense needle mass, I guess. So these have long 4 to 6 inch needles, so pretty long. The needles are always in a cluster of 2. And one of the ways we can distinguish red pine from the next tree we're going to look at is Austrian pine is that when you bend these needles down sharply, they will snap. So they're fairly stout needles as needles go, but they will bend when bent sharply. So
Hey, John.
remember, yeah.
We just had a quick question for some clarification. When they do lose the needles, it's just some of them, not all of them, leaving a bare tree.
Yeah, so when I'm talking about evergreens, which do have some green color all year long, the needle loss in those is confined to kind of the inner cone of the tree. So it's the oldest needles. As you know, with the evergreens, they'll put a candle of new growth at the tip of the branch and form new needles and so forth. So every year you get that candle growth, and so after a few years, those oldest needles, those are the ones that will be dropped and die. The only ones that have that are the deciduous conifers, here's one, and then bald cypress and dawn redwood are the other deciduous conifers, which lose all their needles every year.
Thank you, John.
Yep. All right, so we go to Austrian pine, needles in clusters of 2. I would say more commonly 3 to 5 inches long. They're just a little bit shorter than the red pine, but if you're looking at one versus the other, it may be confusing. So one of the tricks you can use is to bend these needles down fairly sharply. I suppose any needle will bend or break if you do it too much, but these will typically flex when you bend them sharply. But again, needles in clusters of 2, long needles, but Austrian pine is one of those pines that we might see in some landscapes. Virginia pine. We also call this scrub pine. This is not a very attractive tree, I guess, as pine trees go compared to other pines. But it has needles in clusters of 2 and sometimes 3. Um, the really identifying mark of a Virginia pine, I don't know if you can see here on this picture, this pine cone has what looks like little points on each scale there, and they're very sharp. And so this, you have spine, I call it spiny cones, and it's got kind of a scraggly growth form, which is why we call it a scrub pine also. But Virginia pine. Another common pine used a lot for Christmas trees, I guess, is Scotch pine or Scots pine, depending on what book you're reading from. I've seen it both ways. This is needles in clusters of 2, typically 2 to 3 inch long needles. But one of the identifying marks of the Scotch pine is this bright orange bark that can result on some of the younger bark. It won't be on all the tree, it'll be on the younger bark, which it can show up as bright orange. I will say on the Scotch pine, although it's used a lot for Christmas trees, this and some other 2-needle pines can be susceptible to some diseases in the landscape that kind of shorten its life, and after a while, it doesn't look so hot. Jack pine is another pine that we see in landscapes. It's got shorter needles compared to the other pines, maybe 1 to 1.5 inch needles in clusters of 2. But one of the things about jack pine is these cones are kind of twisted, and they're just not straightly formed. So jack pine has these twisted cones. And fairly short needles. Going on to Norway spruce, if you're wanting to plant a spruce tree, this is not a bad choice for your yard. It's one of the better spruces as far as spruce choices are concerned. This one and white spruce would probably be the better ones. But droopy branches, long 4 to 6 inch cones. You see the length of this cone is very long here. But this is a tree that you can tell if you're going 55 miles an hour down the road. It's got these branches that hang out, and then all the sub branches just hang pendulously here from the branches. And there's not another spruce out there that really has this growth form. So Norway spruce is typically one, especially when it's older, it might not have quite this characteristic when it's a very young tree, but we'll have these pendulous sub branches, I guess, and easy to tell. Blue spruce. This is a very commonly planted spruce in landscapes. I wouldn't say it's one that I would recommend necessarily because it's not a native spruce to Indiana, as we said. There's a reason they call it Colorado blue spruce because it came from Colorado. So it's native to the US, but not native to Indiana. These have 1 to 1.25 inch needles, distinctive blue color, but note that that color can vary from blue-green just to plain old green. The younger needles, as you see in this picture, tend to have that more lightish blue cast to them. But depending on the variety or cultivar of spruce that you're purchasing, if you're after a blue spruce, there's some that have a really blue color and some that may be just more like a regular spruce looking tree. So again, one of the trees that is planted a lot in landscapes and is challenged a lot in landscapes by diseases that can get started. Bagworms are also a problem on this from time to time. So anyway, I know it's chosen a lot, but not necessarily one that I would recommend as a first choice.
So, John, when I started working in the nursery industry, It was
Yes.
about 25 or 30 years after everyone and their brother planted blue spruce. So a lot of my planting of trees was replacing these because they would get the needle cast and they look great for like 15 years and then they just go downhill.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And if you get 40 or 50 years out of one of these, you've done well. You've kind of beaten the odds. So Jeff is exactly right. And that landscape experience speaks true to what my experience has been as well, looking at these trees in the landscape. It calls from homeowners. It's been their prize looking tree in their landscape for many years, and all of a sudden it just doesn't look good. So just realize if you plant one of these, it's going to have a limited life. If you know that going in, then be my guest. White spruce. Now, if you look at the foliage of this, you might think, well, gosh, that looks like a blue spruce, and it sort of does. But white spruce is one that has waxy needles. These needles are typically shorter, up to 1 inch, but not more than that. So needles are shorter than a blue spruce. But this is a really fun tree. If you crush the needles and give a good whiff of them, it'll smell like cat urine. So that's one of the things that is unique about this tree. Sometimes people have called this cat spruce, but it's white spruce, and the crushed needles have a pretty kind of rank smell to them. Black spruce I'll cover here, but this is very uncommon in this area. It's more common up north, just the northern tier of counties in Indiana, and on north past that. So black spruce has very short needles, about a 1/2 inch, fuzzy twigs, and more common to northern Indiana. So white fir, if you're after a fir tree, you really got your heart set on a fir tree, this is probably the one that will do the best for you. So white fir or concolor fir. So I have two names there. White fir is kind of the common name. Sometimes you hear it as concolor. The scientific name is Abies concolor. So that's why that name is there. So needles are about an 1.5 to 2.5 inches long. We've got 4 to 5 inch cones, and the crushed needles have a very pleasant smell to them. They have a citrus smell. If you remember what we talked about in firs, here's those cones, and they stand up. Those will weather over time and drop. And if you see a fir cone on the ground, there's a really good chance, in fact, almost 100% chance that it is not a complete cone anymore. It has weathered and has lost some scales. Maybe some squirrels have chewed on it by that time, but by the time these reach the ground, they're pretty torn up. Douglas fir is a very important tree out west. I think can't remember what the wood is all used for, but it's a very important tree. I think perhaps for the paper industry and some other things. But Douglas fir, 3/4 to 1 inch needles. I've seen just a smattering of these in our regional landscapes. But the unique thing about Douglas fir, it's got these little bracts that come off of the needle scales here, or off the cone scales. And so that's very unique of Douglas fir. And I'll start to point out, this is one, remember we said fir trees, all the true fir trees, the cones stand up. Well, here's one that's got the fir in its name, but the cones are down. And this is the correct use of this word, Douglas-fir. And what you see is if you've got a dash in the name like this, or if the name is crammed together, like two words are crammed together, that means it's fir-like, but it's not a true fir. So Douglas fir is not a true fir, and it's denoted by this little dash here. Balsam fir is one that you may run across. I've just run across a very few of these in regional landscapes and also in some parks. But cones that stand up. What do you get with what you get with balsam fir? Fairly short needles, but purplish to green young cones. And you also see resin blisters kind of emanating from some of the lenticels in the bark and so forth. So resin blisters are pretty common with this tree. Eastern hemlock. If you have, so for most of our pines and spruces and so forth, we want full sun. We've talked about the shading having an effect on the conifers. But if you've got a partially shady spot in your lawn, your landscape, and you would like some green color all year long, Eastern hemlock is probably your best choice. This will tolerate some shading, some overstory from larger trees. And so this would be a good choice if you got a spot that doesn't get all that sunlight. It's got cones that hang down here, and this is a younger cone. These ones that are more open are older cones. And the unique thing about Eastern hemlock is that the top side, as you look down on the needles from the top, they're very green. On the underside, if you flip that branch over, they will have whitish cast to them. So this is the pores on the needles that kind of look whitish and show up as this whitish cast. Sorry, I can't speak very well today. But it's kind of like a two-tone, you know, top green and bottom white. Bald cypress. This is a unique tree. Again, this is one of our deciduous conifers. It's got short, soft needles. It's a very attractive tree, and it's one that would be adapted to very wet spots. That's another thing to take a look at when you're researching trees and shrubs for your particular landscape. What are the characteristics you're trying to put this plant in? So this is one that would thrive in a wet spot. Deciduous, round cones, very unique. So remember when I said not every cone looks like a pine cone? Well, here's a really good example. But as those mature and break apart, you know, there's different chambers in there that have the various seeds. Very similar to this is dawn redwood, but dawn redwood has opposite rather than an alternate arrangement we have with the bald cypress twigs. So northern white cedar, here's one of those hyphenated. So this is not a true cedar. This is actually a type of, it's an arborvitae. I believe it's in the juniper family, but don't hold me to that. Northern white cedar or arborvitae. We have these scale-like needles that kind of look like fish scales. This has a spicy fragrance when you crush the needles. It's got pretty small cones, as you see here. Northern white cedar or arborvitae is one of those that they've got, typically will grow in kind of a columnar kind of growth arrangement. So this is used as a kind of a living fence around some properties, and it's well adapted for that purpose. So northern white cedar, one of the plants you can consider. Eastern red cedar. Now here's another example of a cone that doesn't look like a pine cone. To me, I describe this as like a pale blueberry, but you might have another description. But this has scale-like and awl-like needles, depending on what part of the branch you're looking at. Very important wildlife tree. To me, again, my opinion, this is just not the most attractive yard tree. So it's by far the most common conifer in Indiana, most widespread. Nothing comes close to it. So this is a native tree. It's got important wildlife value. just not the most attractive tree. Now I've got a slide in here. We've talked about smell a little bit, so I thought I would summarize that if you want to have just one more sensory experience trying to identify a tree, if you're around a blue spruce, remember those crushed needles will have a pleasant, pungent odor. If you have a white spruce, that will smell like cat urine. If you have a white fir, that will smell like citrus. And northern white cedar or arborvitae, those have kind of a spicy fragrance to them. And that's something that if you're putting together a little tree walk, or this is golden for kids as well, to just have them sense, through their nose what these different ones smell like. It's just a good experience for them, and it's a memorable experience, especially if you have a white spruce. Got a few shrubs here I'll cover. Mugo pine is one of the pine choices we can use as a shrub. It has that shrubby form and it will maintain that shrubby form. However, it can get large. What we do to keep this a more compact plant is to just pinch off about a half of that new candle growth every spring, and that will help to maintain that compact size. But these have needles in clusters of 2. It's a shrubby pine, but one that is chosen fairly often for landscapes. We have yew. There are different types of yew: Canada yew, American yew, Japanese. If you've got yews around your house, it's 99% sure it's going to be a Japanese yew. They have the growth form that people desire for shrubs around the house. Flat, flexible needles. It's got these red berry-like cones. The thing I will caution you about yews, Japanese yew, if you trim these shrubs, and a lot of times people will trim these kind of like a hedge, and if you've got a pasture nearby with animals in that pasture, don't throw the clippings of the yew over into the pasture, because that can be deadly, and I mean deadly, to grazing livestock. So dangerous plant for livestock, very common around the house. But that's just something to keep in mind there. And then we get to junipers. We've got all kinds of junipers. Here we have the common juniper. It's kind of a shrubby ground cover type plant. But this has all like needles, bluish berry-like cones. And there's ground juniper or creeping juniper. It's very prostrate, and but there's a lot of juniper species out there, from ground covers to shrubs to also trees. So good choice. It's a native choice. So, but you've got a lot of variability out there. A few words about conifer care before we wrap up the presentation portion of our time together. Here are some things you can do with conifers that are recommended. Choose the right site for the conifer. So generally that's well-drained and fertile soils with plenty of sun. But we do have some conifers. I mentioned eastern hemlock is one that will tolerate some fairly significant shade. Choose the right conifer for the site. Well-drained, full sun. Here's our shady. In addition to hemlock, northern white cedar or Norway spruce may be ones that'll tolerate some shade. If you got a wet spot in your lawn or in your landscape, bald cypress, dawn redwood, eastern larch, all those deciduous conifers will adapt more readily to those wetter spots. I would say inspect regularly for insect and disease pests and address these early. What happens with a lot of the homeowners I've dealt with over the years is you don't notice a problem on an evergreen tree until it's really advanced. In other words, these pests, either insect or disease, have been working on this tree for a long time, and suddenly it looks noticeable to you, or it catches your eye. Well, that's the beauty in catching it early. Sometimes you can address that problem early. By the time it looks obvious to you, it may be actually too late to address that. So we've got all kinds of insects and also various needlecast diseases. Some things I would encourage you not to do is plant conifers where they won't thrive. If you get a spot on your lawn landscape that stays wet, don't plant one of these conifers that likes dry, well-drained soils. So know where you're placing these trees. For conifer shrubs, for most of them, we're talking about typically the juniper type of shrubs that have a kind of a feathery character to them. Don't prune them back if you're trying to control size to areas on the branch that are barren of foliage. You've got to prune back only as far as you've got active green foliage still growing, or that branch will remain barren for the rest of its life. Now, our Japanese yew is the exception to that rule. You can prune back to bare wood, and that's got latent buds in there that will start popping and form foliage. Don't count on conifers lasting forever. There's very few in Indiana that are actually truly native. And even some of those native conifers are only truly native to isolated areas of Indiana. We think of white pine being a native pine to Indiana, and it is. But it's only truly native to a few isolated spots in Indiana. So even white pine can be challenged on some of our soils and sites. So just remember that these evergreens are not going to last forever. Now, eastern red cedar, as I mentioned, it's the most common native conifer by far. And that's my personal preference. You may have yours. I don't think it's a very great looking yard tree, but that's, beauty's in the eye of the beholder. But it does have wildlife benefits. So that's the end of the presentation. I just wanted to say that a lot of these images are from USDA NRCS plants database, and some of those images may have copyright. So this is not for sale. It's just for educational purposes. So keep that in mind. And I'll take any questions that people have.
All right. Thank you, John. So if you have questions, you can throw those in the chat box. I have put the link to our post-presentation survey. This is usually where I trip up, but hopefully that will go along just fine. But we appreciate everyone joining us today.